Hello, and welcome to the University of Utah Press's podcast. I'm Hannah New. With me today is Sara Ellen Fowler. The judge and the wonderful poet Joan Kane chose Fowler's manuscript for the Aga Shahid Ali Prize in Poetry, and the book, Two Signatures, came out in the spring of this year. Sara Ellen Fowler is a writer, artist, and educator living in California. Her writing has appeared in the Offing, Extra, Contemporary Art Journal, Interim, and Gigantic Sequins, among others. In 2023, she was awarded a California Arts Council Individual Artist Fellowship. Sara holds a BFA in Sculpture from Art Center College of Design and an MFA in Creative Writing from the University of California, Riverside. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be talking about my book.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, first I'd like to talk about the title of your manuscript, Two Signatures. How did you come up with this title for this collection as a whole? Clearly, there's a reference to dual imagery a lot in your poems to profound effect, but I feel you went deeper with your title. Could you explain your thought process for this?
Yeah, the phrase actually comes from an orphan line that does not appear in the book, but I felt like it does describe a lot of what's happening in the book, and I'm trying to get at the multiple valences of the word signature. So we have like signatures of time, signatures that are needed in a contract, and in particular like for a wedding, or there's like a wedding poem, an epithalamium in the book. Also thinking about like energetic signatures, like what it's like when someone walks into a room. And also relating to like my experience of bipolar disorder, there's like a variety, like a range of emotional experiences with that too. So I think that's kind of the banner. Two signatures, I feel like can, be a banner.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think about signatures of time, but yeah, that's definitely comes up, and that's very interesting. It immediately evoked some images in my mind when I first read it. It's just and I immediately thought of contracts, like how you need the two signatures for contracts and binding. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really interesting for me. I also really want to discuss the horse imagery because I very much love horses. I had one for a while. Mm-hmm. And you make it work so well in your poems. Mm-hmm. I say this because when I was just college fresh, I had a poetry teacher who told me to stop writing about horses. Oh. Yeah, but every single poem I was handing in was horse this and horse that. So like when these images come up, you use it so well and it's not overused. Mm-hmm. So can you discuss your use of horse imagery in your poems?
Totally. Yeah. Thank you for this question. I have not owned horses in my life, but it was something that was a part of my mom's life. She grew up in rural, like central Ohio. So that was always like a point of fascination and imagination and kind of like fantasy in my life. And I feel like horses are a really powerful archetype of power, not just about like muscle, but like heart and like bravery in these ways. And there was like a horse of my childhood who does appear in one of the poems. And this horse I visited from when I was, 6 or 7 to like when I would visit my grandparents, like coming back from college, we would like go say hi down the road. Yeah, that horse like held a lot of real estate in my imagination of he was a friendly guy. Yeah, there was also like an electric fence in the paddock that I definitely like touched once. So that filters into a poem as well.
I remember that poem.
And then I think like there's a mythic scale, or like I kind of use horses in like a mythic or like spiritual register too. And that sort of comes out of my imagination and just wanting to kind of explore the image.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for that. Do you mind reading a horse poem?
Yes, let's do it.
I call them horse poems, but they're not horse poems. A poem with a horse in it.
Yes, absolutely. Maybe I will read the one that has the horse of my childhood in it. Yeah. It's in the first section of the book. It's called Old Paint.
Old Paint. Paint referencing the color of the horse, I'm guessing.
Yes.
And that is on page 16.
Old Paint. The pasture levitates with weeds in a cold mist. The gelding draws the perimeter with mud-packed hooves. I keep my eyes low, quietly working the barbed wire spurs in my hands. Warning stars. with tufts of hair coronaed around them since 1988. And the FFA jacket, abandoned in the barn, adjourns into a nest of mice. Thou set this good corner. I come by with apples, emboss my palms with kin wishes, seal my prayer for egress upon the old paint's searching lips. His teeth smack a cipher so simple, I've been overthinking it this whole life.
Thank you. What was the old paint's name?
Chief.
Chief? It's a good horse name.
Yeah. I feel like it's a classic horse name.
Yeah. That's good. Thank you. Switching gears a little bit. So you have several sections in your book, and section 3, which is right in the middle of the book, is a section that I felt was different from all the other ones in format, in just, everything. And it's section 3, a loose extension of an earlier meaning. And I'd like to discuss your thoughts on why you went a different direction and why you placed it in the middle of the book.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for this question. Yeah, there are 5 sections in the book, so this is a midpoint, and it was architected over a period of time where at first I was writing discrete poems, and then I kind of realized that all of those poems were describing the emotional experience of art school and some tensions that I had in my education. I felt like giving it a banner, which is vague in time, but also kind of alludes to a revision of one's experience or a digesting of it, was a way to bring it all together in one sequence. So yeah, the poems don't have individual titles, and the first few kind of have a structure of I learned this, I learned that. And then there's some other ones that are kind of not following that prompting, but sort of speaking to the same psychic space of angst and curiosity that art school was. And yeah, I think there's also an arc in that sequence of transformation and coming into one's own sense of power or own sense of will. And in the first poem, in that section, the speaker is kind of giving their power away and fawning, not understanding what they bring to their education. And then at the end of the book, or at the end of the sequence, the last line is, "My will is my own water." So there is kind of this settling into and sense of discovering one's agency. So yeah, a loose extension of an earlier meaning is, a revision and a recovering of an interesting era in my life.
Let's you mentioned tension in education, and I so you have a degree in sculpture in this physical visual art, and then you have a degree in poetry, which is this auditory. So was that the type of tension, or was it the tension of you versus art?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it was a little more of a relational tension, and yeah, just navigating power dynamics and coercion and understanding who I was as an artist and my own creativity and my own imagination, and also my own instincts and impulses for making things with my hands, which I was, really engaged in making sculptures. I would often take things apart to understand kind of what their constituent parts were made of, and then I would reimagine or refinagle or edit out to just the salient bits, which kind of sounds like writing too as I'm saying it. But yeah, it was long, labor intensive kind of pieces where I was sitting with my own mind or listening to bookworm podcasts or making notes in my notebook, which was always open in the studio too. So it was making sculptures was a psychic space as much as, raccoon messing around with stuff they found in the woods.
That's an interesting metaphor there.
It was not really a raccoon. It wasn't raccoon energy. It was more like a crow that gives gifts to their favorite people of shiny objects on a windowsill. But yeah.
That's interesting because I have never thought of sculpture and poetry on a same wavelength at all. And it was interesting how you were describing that process of sculpting. And it does sound a little bit like poetry. Do you want to just talk about how you got into those two fields, or?
Sure. Yeah. I think an obsession that started when I was using my hands more in art school, making performance and sculpture, was obsession with like temperature as kind of a conduit for like presence, and then like texture as just like, wow, the world is made of textures and they're so fun or pleasurable or strange or changing or molting. Like, what is that? That's really cool. There is a lot of temperature and texture in the book as well. So it's a consistent obsession. And the transition between making art and investing in like language more and more, I feel is like a sort of natural transition for me. When I finished school, I moved into a smaller space with everything I'd ever made, one room studio, kind of early 20s era. Yeah. And I was like, wow, these are all my things. And what I want to do is just have like a lap size studio. And what fits in my lap? Well, a notebook and a book. And so this is how I want to touch my mind and think my thoughts and ask questions. Yeah, I think the questions became more verbal and a little more internal. And yeah, so the form sort of like emerged as this other associative, powerful poetry form. I had the good fortune of meeting some good like mentors and teachers in Los Angeles before I enrolled in an MFA program. So I was able to have a community of readers and friends who we were all exploring. And then I kind of moved into the more formalized MFA workshop setting and was able to like further explore and experiment.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Do you mind reading a poem from A Loose Extension of an Earlier Meaning? I listed the one that starts with just give me a job, but feel free to pick whatever one you would like from that section.
Sure. I will read that one. So yes, this poem doesn't have a title. It's just under the banner title of this section. Just give me a job, like a mask with no eye holes, all the better to destroy my art with. I seek the private things, gessoed panels left to dry in a room with just one set of keys. The set threaded into a birch branch in 1988, and now I could not cut them down if I wanted to. They've grown inseparable. I mean, time, what texture, is involution. I don't know what art is. Show me the ratty, loose-toothed key in your thigh.
Nice, thank you. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to touch on something you said earlier about two signatures and bipolar disorder. Mm-hmm. And I find it fitting that you work in art. It's just all the bipolar people I know have to loose. And I'm making a grand assumption here. I'm sure not all bipolar people are like this, but they have to do art. They have to create in some way, whether that be poetry or art or painting. Mm-hmm. So do you feel that relates in a way? Maybe I'm digging here. But
No, yeah. Thanks for the question. I do know other bipolar people. I think it can be a bit of a electric nerve or like unprotected nerve. And I think that makes for pretty highly sensitive people. And what do highly sensitive people do to take care of their feelings? Like we do hold a space of curiosity and a space of, just really being in touch with emotions and using them, mining them, expressing them, like giving them the space that they need. Because if you don't give your emotions the space that they need, they'll ride you. Yeah, so I can mostly speak to my experience, which is like I've learned to trust my instincts and understand how to say when, and also really go towards the things that I care about with a lot of like urgency and like candor or an experimental heart too. So I think all of that can kind of be traced back to what you need to do to learn how to care for yourself when you have like a mental illness. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, that's a good thought about being really in touch with emotions and how to care for oneself. And perhaps art, in some manner, is one of those ways to self-care.
Yeah, I think it's like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, you just have to be honest with yourself, and that translates to being honest on the page or towards the world, like speaking what you feel needs to be said. Yeah, I think that's of value.
Right, I like that. I like that, being honest with yourself and honest with the world. I like that a lot, yeah. All right. Now I'm going to get into some more general questions that I just like to ask.
Of course.
And do you have favorites?
I have favorites. I also have enjoyed having the book in the world because there's like some sleeper hits that are coming out of like people really articulating poems that resonate with them. And so I get the gift of like getting to see my work through someone else's eyes and kind of like rediscover it. So that's been really beautiful. There's also poems that like I think the time scale of how I've come to understand them, I didn't even understand them completely when I submitted the manuscript. And so I've lived with them more and I'm like, oh, okay, you're doing interesting things. Like, oh, I respect you. Yeah. So there are definitely poems that feel more personal than others. And then there are poems in here that I think sort of like telescope out into like questions that I'm still working on, like in new work.
Do you want to read a favorite?
Yeah, I'm just like scanning through here and like weighing weighing the mood. I think one that is really, it's a bit of an outlier, but I do think it's important in the book is an Ars Poetica that's at the end of the book. This is like,
page 64.
Yes, thank you. It touches on kind of my origin story and yeah, my relationship with my siblings. Maybe I'll read that one.
Yes, please.
Okay. Ars Poetica. So I use my middle name, the other woman who holds me the day I am born. NICU nurse, whose counter practice to soothing premature infants is singing harmony into incandescent fields of drying oil paintings. 4 pounds 0 ounces, 3 pounds 10 ounces, 2 pounds 8 ounces, shivering petals. Shitting light, moment to moment, purple, we triplets curl together on a blanket in our in utero constellation, make a window into mom's unlit body. A neonatal hymn is a prayer with all vowels. Ellen's countless daughters chant an up-breathing chord. I am the alto with the flashing moth.
Oh, that's really neat. So I noticed you made a little bit of a change there. And I like that because it references the triplets, right?
All three of us.
All
yeah.
Three. So you are triplets.
Yeah. Yeah. So
nice.
In the book, for those of you following along, 3 pounds 10 ounces is how much I weighed when I was born, but the other weights are my siblings. So, and my brother was the biggest, which is why he's the oldest. So thanks, Kyle.
Oh, that's interesting. So, because I'm guessing it was cesarean, hence the window. Mm-hmm. So they just declared him firstborn?
I think it's best practice to take out the hardiest child first. And then, yeah, so by birth weight.
Oh.
And then, yeah, my sibling M was 2 pounds 8 ounces, which is very small. Like, I guess, you could hold a baby or, the infant and her head would like be in your palm and her feet would be like only halfway down your arm,
It's
like
very tiny.
Tiny. It's actually like a little hard for me to imagine because I haven't held an infant that small, but luckily we had good nurses in Toledo. So
oh, nice.
Mm-hmm.
I like that as an origin story. In fact, this poem, when I was reading through, was one that struck me. So I'm glad you read this one, and I like that change. I think that was a good one to make. Yeah,
it's funny. I had like a pizza party book launch with friends, and my brother flew down from San Francisco to Los Angeles to be there, and I was going to read this poem, and I was like, oh shoot, like Kyle's not in. Oh, I should put Em and Kyle in here. What was I thinking? So that was like a real-time edit.
Oh, nice. That's very interesting.
Game time decision.
Great. So what poets and writers do you turn to when you need inspiration?
Yeah, I have poets who are close to me, who I've learned from, who I turn towards. One of them is a professor that I worked with at UC Riverside, Allison Dennis White. She writes incredible, austere, like monostick, which is like a one-line stanza, poems that really do so much with like such concise utterances, and also kind of share a value system of like working in ekphrasis, which is poetry that digests or takes as inspiration visual art. And she uses visual art as kind of a foil or an oblique subject through which she can consider other like profound griefs in her life. And so it's like kind of, I watch her in her poems like ricochet off the art to be able to say these like really almost unsayable things about people that she's lost and loved. And I don't have the same reason to speak, or it doesn't bring me to the page in the same way, but I've learned that art as a foil or a way to like begin speaking is like a very generative space for me. Yeah. And then Jean Valentine is definitely a poet that I turn to. And Jean Valentine was actually a teacher of Joan Nevaeh Kane.
Oh, nice.
So I love that there's like kind of a lineage there.
Yeah.
And also Lucille Clifton like really is a poet that I turn to feel like galvanized and to be reminded that poetry is about like really saying the capital T important truths, and that you can just say them sometimes. You don't have to. I mean, she uses figuration. She uses all kinds of important techniques and myth and all this stuff, but she also like really has an accessible voice that resonates across all kinds of readers, and I value that and like also want to learn from that.
Yeah, I agree with that. She's a good one to read. I have a request. Would you read one of my favorite poems in here, which is on page 67, which is Parachute. Will you read that one for us? I even got a little heart sticker.
Oh, I got a heart sticker. Yes. Yeah, so this is a love poem that comes out of having a sweetheart who's an engineer. Yeah, and it, for those of you reading along or not, it's the last poem in the book. Parachute. Paper craft of wings assembling inside a chrysalis and wrecked with starting over. The new body shuddering and turning, not toward, except to say further inside, fold an armature for flight. This is one prayer. And there were many workups and rehearsals, blasts, straining with extreme temperature and thrust, until you used the length of my body to measure and tuck, quilt and press the kit to 33 pounds, quietly. Could have been jeweler's cloth, puckered silk, a furl of wills, come back. Drogue heart, air, and light, I am waiting, looking up.
Great, thank you very much. Do you have anything else you would like to add to what we've talked about today?
This has been a really nice conversation, so thank you for like kind of creating this space to talk about these poems a little more. I feel a lot of gratitude to Joan Nevaeh Kane, who appreciated my manuscript and wanted to see it in the world, and I'm excited to sort of be writing in that lineage and that wake. And I just have a lot of gratitude for University of Utah and this program.
Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day. I know you flew in from LA, so I bet you're tired. So thank you for joining us. This has been Hannah New with the University of Utah Press podcast.